for that. Welcome, everybody, on this Sunday, January 31st in 2021. We're almost in February of 2021. And that's not even fair. This time warp has been crazy. It feels like we're living in a ninth dimension of like this like alternate reality where it's like on the brink of the Book of Eli. But shit has been kind of crazy, but there's also been a lot to celebrate, a lot to look forward to. I think there's been like a crazy mix of optimism woven into this like ridiculous movie of a time period. I don't really know how else to describe it, but the reason that we're here today is to have like a 2.0 version of our original conversation, which is this is our 10th one, I'm pretty sure, which is exciting that we've kept it going for this long, because I feel like usually stuff like this fizzles out and people just like get busy or whatever. So I commend everybody who keeps coming back. I appreciate you all and love you all. So I'm glad. And for people that have not been here before for like any of these, welcome for the first one. We're here. We're here to stay. If none of y'all have checked out the website, I highly recommend it. It's live. And we got like, that's like the calendar for all the events, all of our social media shit, all in like one central place. And we're trying to do some like media initiatives and stuff like that. So keep tabs on that. Without further ado, let's get it started for today. We got a decent number. Sharad and I were scared there for a sec because nobody like registers until Saturday. So we're just like, I guess we don't.
I got to plan.
Anybody
register. The last minute register is key.
It's chill. We're here for it. We're going to get it going today. I think we know everybody here, but my name is Marcus, just for the purpose of the recording and edification of everybody in the room. My wonderful co-host here is Sharad.
What's up, everybody?
And
I don't know what's up.
We know why we're here today, talking about race, following up our original conversation, where we discuss, kind of in the heat of all the protests and everything. I remember like literally it was like days after we went to the USC protest. I definitely remember it was kind of like an eerie experience, but also very empowering at the same time. But in the heat of all of that, we came together and we talked about, open the conversation a little bit. And I feel like it was a really interesting moment that opened a lot of doors for people like that I had known for a long time to finally have an avenue to speak on things like this. So I'm just hoping for this to be that again. We have a couple good questions, I think that'll inspire some conversation. I know we got some people with some strong opinions up in here. So hope to hear from you all. We're going to get it kicked off with a poll. And Sean and I came up with this question over FaceTime the other day. And this has come up in conversation, I don't know how many times, like in one-off, and I'm so intrigued I feel like this has a lot of relation to larger concepts that help us steer us in the right direction. And we're actually going to do, after we do the poll, we're going to split up into breakout rooms because I know it can be a little stressful to talk in front of like 30 people. And all right, we got 3 people for disagree. Only one person for my opinion is complicated. I don't buy that. 7, 9, 2. Nobody agrees. Nobody agrees with that. Sharad, where's Tucci?
Dude, I told him to come slide, but he traversed through like the snow to go back home for dinner. So can't blame the guy.
That's fair. Traversing through the snow, not fun. Winter weather. All right, I think that's like mostly everybody who's up with us. All right, we got. I don't know. Can you guys see? Unless. All right, now I'm gonna share the results just for everybody. I don't know how it shows up on your screen, but we got a lot of people disagreeing. We are gonna. We'll talk about this. I want to open up the conversation in the breakouts. We're gonna ask one more question and then we'll hop into breakouts real quick. Introduce yourselves, meet somebody if you don't know that person. Tell them your favorite color, maybe. Auras are cool. But that's our first question. I'm interested to hear what people say, and then let me close this. Let me see if there's another one. Okay, this one's a little bit more meta, I would say. Not meta, that's the wrong word, but agree or disagree in life, how you pass is more important than your racial or ethnic identity. I think later on, I'm sure we'll eventually end up touching on like Biden and Harris and like what their election and inauguration like means for. Ooh, interesting. Okay, this one's a lot more. My opinion is complicated. I'll explain more later. I appreciate people being honest about that. Um, that's cool though. If you agree, if you disagree, whatever you feeling, think about it. Hum the Jeopardy song in your head, maybe. That really helps me think. I'm not gonna lie. All right, we got 17. I'll give it like 5 more seconds for people who have not cast their whatever. What's up, Matt? Nice to see you. We got some new faces in the house as well, which is exciting. And some old friends, which is also exciting. All right, I'm gonna end this and share these results. This is where we're at with this. I want us to go in the breakout rooms, introduce yourself, say what's up, and then you can discuss whichever question you want first. But open up. Why do you feel the way you feel about this? And also, if you picked my opinion is complicated, I'll explain more. Explain. I'm gonna stop sharing these. Do a little zoom. Zip is absolutely how many people we got. All right. Oh no. Oscar, you froze.
And I'm now living in DC.
This is awkward. I did not graduate from USC. I'm a high school senior and from Dallas, Texas.
Dope. So yeah, which one do you guys want to talk about first?
Talk about the locks. I think that's a good one.
Locks. Okay. What do you guys say? I said disagree, but what do you guys think? Emily, I can't hear you.
Oh, I said it's complicated.
Thoughts?
My thought process was kind of like, if like there's plenty of things that come from other cultures that people that are not that culture or that
on your name before you even get to meet people and they get to see actually like even what you look like.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with some of those things. I just read the book, The Vanishing Half, I think. And it was about two twins who are mixed race, and one of them passed as white. And this is, I think, is in the 60s. But just the trajectory of like how these people were so inseparable in their hometown, and then when they went out into like society, who knew them outside of like their roots and their family, the only thing that mattered was how this woman passed. And she definitely also fully embraced the fact that she could get away with being a white person in the 60s and like really leaned into that. So I feel like my opinion's complicated, most because I don't know enough about what people go through, and then just having just like very brief exposure to this fictional book that is just on my mind from 2 weeks ago.
I would definitely like echo what you said. I remember in high school there was a set of twin girls, and they were mixed, and I think one of them passed more for white and the other one was definitely darker. And I think that they were very like open about their experience with it, and I think it caused a lot of like identity issues for both of them in very different ways. So I think it's a very complicated topic.
Yeah, I think I agree that it's complicated. And I think that like the way, obviously it's a different experience from like the world viewing you versus like you viewing yourself. If you were able to pass, obviously, like I'm white, I don't know what it's like, but I would assume that like if you were in that experience, like the way that you view yourself as like passing or not passing is different than how the rest of the world views
dreads in a culturally appropriate way, I think.
Okay. Lexi, Jane, Grayson, any thoughts?
I'm Jane. This is Grayson too, by the way. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of it that way that either of you guys just mentioned. I like don't know enough about the history or the cultural meaning about dreadlocks. So like me as a white woman who doesn't know anything about the cultural significance, I would think that's totally inappropriate for me. But now I'm seeing it in other ways, like you guys have suggested.
Yeah, I would agree with what Jane said. Like the more that, like I put disagree just because like I don't have much of a nuanced like perspective on it in that sense. But I do see like the point that Ashley brought up or that Adam brought up, like there are some like of those more specific scenarios where you could see like an argument otherwise, which kind of almost gets into the second question.
Okay.
What's the debate you and Tucci have?
Oh, God.
Heath says that, okay, well, a lot of times what our arguments boil down to is he wants to talk about like in like the ethereal perfect world, what should it be like? And should we be immediately planning for this perfected world, or should you be reacting?
It's just our intramural basketball team. What's up?
And now it's even more.
Funny.
What's up, Jane?
How's it going, Marcus?
I'm gonna give a 1 minute warning to everybody, and then we're gonna pop back.
Marcus, I was saying that this is basically like our starting five for our intramural basketball team.
Pretty much. I miss basketball so much it actually like hurts my soul.
I literally haven't played in like a year.
I don't want
like, since before.
Let's stop talking about it. I'm gonna get sad. Yeah, I'm gonna be sad. Sanjay, is BJ here?
I think he's running a little bit late. He should hopefully be here soon.
Great.
He had another call or something.
I feel you. Do we have an interesting conversation about dreads?
Oh,
we forgot about that question.
I think that I'm one of those people that answered that it's complicated, I think. And I said that just because, like, I think it kind of leads into this, like, second question as well of, like, you have people from these cultures that might not necessarily be, like, Black, but they are part of this culture, and so they present themselves in the same way that this culture presents itself. I'm thinking of like Jamaica as an example, where it kind of leads into this like second question of like they may not look Black to some people, so some people may have this like assumption on them, and then it kind of, so that's why I think it gets complicated sometimes.
Oh, that was shorter than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be 60 seconds. All right. That's an interesting thought, though. I definitely.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that later.
All right. Hold on 1 sec. I got to make sure I co-host. Welcome. I believe we just had a couple of people pop in. How are the breakout rooms? What was good? Do we have some interesting conversations?
I like that better, honestly, to start off with.
Down to start off? No, exactly. You gotta do that. I think it's pretty interesting. Does anybody want to share out on any of those things with the larger group on either of those points? Anything interesting from the breakout rooms?
So for our group, I mean, we actually didn't end up talking about the second question, which I thought was interesting because that was, to me, seemed like the more interesting question. But we ended up talking about dreads and everything, and we ended up talking about how to quote unquote properly appreciate aspects of another culture. And I mean, like, we started talking about the whole Mahjong line company that like recently blew up, and other past circumstances of like white people owning Asian restaurants and saying it's like dirty food that they're cleaning up and whatnot. And I just think the conversation went in an interesting direction.
Anybody else?
In our breakout room, we also kind of veered topics because Marcus put the question about seeing people of color in commercials since like the increase, whether you've seen an increase or not. And so our conversation kind of veered towards that topic. And then we got into when brands in the past 6 months or so have been making statements about diversity, equity, inclusion. They've been making statements about their statistics or different initiatives that they're doing. Like being happy that it's happening, but kind of being frustrated by the motivation of it. That it's more because it's like what they think they should be doing to build their reputation right now, or they think it's like trendy versus like whether they actually care about it.
Something that I actually thought was a really interesting opinion that Ashley kind of illuminated to me was the fact that like in Egypt, there are people who are like identifying as like, or like that are white, like, you know, Egyptian or like white North African versus black North African. And so like when it comes to the dreads question, is that going to be like the determining characteristic, or since kind of like the heritage aspect of dreads is a little bit, you know, detached from that place, is that like, you know, something that people should consider or not? So that really opened my mind a little bit.
Yeah, that was actually something that I presented at like the very end of our conversation of like, there are some cultures where there are non-Black people that live in those cultures. They don't identify as Black, and they're still part of that culture. So they still practice some of those cultural practices. So that's kind of where I think the first question also kind of leads into the second question a little bit of kind of like the perception that people have on those people as opposed to the perception that that person has on themselves.
Ooh, big dings. Anybody else? Mohammed had an interesting point in the chat of the nomenclature of like dreadlocks and locks. To be frank, like I think the general, everybody kind of in like the black hair community just calls them like locks, LOCS. Like people usually see it like written out like that. But I'm not well versed enough in that particular history of like the nomenclature, to be honest. I don't know if anybody else has another opinion on that, but if you do, we can talk about it. But we can move it on. to our kind of like next portion. And like I said, Sharad and I wanted this to be kind of like a revisiting of kind of going off the conversation starter that I put in that group of like this idea of like representation in commercials and seeing like an uptick in like people of color represented in like commercials that have been like shot more recently. And this idea of like a reflection of practices and a change in practice as spurred on by this you know, wave of activism in response to all of these like heinous things that were happening in 2020. And so we kind of wanted to open with the question. I don't know if any of y'all saw on Instagram, like our videos, this idea of if 2020 and like the events that happened and like, you know, we were here 8 months ago or whatever it was, not 6 months, you know, 8 months ago, sitting on Zoom discussing what was going on, and people were, you know, saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I think we can start doing this as a community and do that. And I want to have like a genuine period of reflection to see like if you felt like personally it was sort of was this like an enlightening moment for you, or did it spur any sort of action? Did you make commitments? Do you feel like you've acted on those? Do you feel like you've approached situations differently? Have you been having different conversations with family members, with you know, friends? Do you feel like that was you've been quote unquote improving? I think which I don't necessarily know if that's like the perfect language, but I think you all get the gist of what I'm trying to say. Just a little bit of like a self-reflection from like March to now. This whole, was it all in vain? Do we feel like we're making progress personally, and then both outside of ourselves in the community, as kind of like we discussed with the commercial thing, or with representation in like politics, we could move in that direction. But I'm curious to see, obviously take a little bit of time to think about it. And actually, if we want to go back in the breakout rooms, we could do that. Or stay up in the big group if people have opinions or want to share those reflections.
I personally felt like it made everybody's opinions like magnified, and that worked in both ways. I think you had people who really felt like they had the opportunity to go and like kind of speak out a little more and do a little more. But then at the same time, I think, especially living where I am, Dallas, Texas, yeehaw, there were a lot of people who kind of saw an increase or an impetus in the movement as an opportunity to kind of like fight back. And that was kind of unhealthy, in my opinion.
Vinci, hit it.
So I can only speak for pretty specific contexts, but I know at least in the academic setting that I'm in right now, it had a huge impression on the way that I go to class. Like I'm in law school right now, and every single one of my classes now like devotes like the entire first week of class to talking about like racial inequity and how it's built into the system, and how the law is like a product of hundreds of years of like systemic racism and white ideals, and how it's up to us as like an upcoming generation of lawyers to like grapple with these realities and, you know, understand the effects of how it you know, still disproportionately impacts minorities, and how it's sort of a tool to uphold like these standards of society that are you know, basically formed by whiteness and always have been. And apparently this is like sort of a new part of our curriculum, just because before, like, you know, maybe they would send you home to like read something about this like in your textbook, but like seriously, the first week of every single class that we have, we talk about like how it relates to like criminal law, or like how it relates to like contracts. And it's really, really nice because it led to like sort of like any time now that we're in class, like discussions that we do have for the rest of the semester after that get framed through this like critical race lens. And I think that's super cool. And I hope that this will not only become the norm, you know, in this like very limited space that I'm in, but maybe we'll see it spread throughout the rest of our educational institutions. I think that's a positive step.
I will say also on the high school front, our literature has definitely also become a little more diverse, and I appreciate that. I'm in a private school though, so I don't know if that's applying to public schools, but definitely I've seen a change in like the authors and like where our books are coming from. So I think that's been a healthy change.
I'm just going to jump back in really quickly and say it's also sort of changed the way I approach my own role in this, just because I sort of like I'm an Indian American, and in America, Indian Americans benefit from being considered rightfully or wrongfully model minorities. And so while I faced racism, this is sort of, reminded me that, you know, I have like a sort of duty to lean on my own, identity and sort of facilitate dialogue um, in the spaces that I exist in, and be conscious of the fact that my own experiences with like just because like I may have experienced racism on some hand does not mean I've actually experienced racism in the ways that other groups in America have. And I need to constantly like sort of carry that awareness with me, and that should frame like so much of my thinking and my interactions. And that's been sort of a new understanding for me that I had sort of always known, but I had never had it laid out so clearly or said in so many words in my head. And I thought that was really valuable.
The other thing, going back to Marcus's initial question about 2020, one thing that it really underscored for me was, of course, like we can look at, hundreds of years, specifically the last 6 years, like Black Lives Matter and the entire new race movement as well. But I think 2020 especially underscored how closely coupled race and class are. Because I mean, even if you look at lockdowns, right, the way we look at lockdowns is like, oh, like we want to go to the restaurant, blah, blah, blah. But lifting a lock, like in California now, lifting a lockdown also means that people who don't necessarily have health insurance, working minimum wage, have to go back to work, and might have to pay the consequences if they get COVID, which they may not be able to recover from. And like those people may also be part of a certain race as well, right? Or a couple races, right? And so like that other thing, and especially now that's Wall Street bets and this whole thing, the class struggle is like huge now, and it's even becoming front of mind. And it is about race as well, but it's like this class struggle that is not necessarily, I mean, there's a lot of poor white people too, right? Like the class struggle in America is now becoming like, it might merge different groups together because they realize, they have similar struggles and they have similar, oppressors. And so I think that's also going to be interesting to watch how that evolves over time, and hopefully how it might be able to bring certain groups together to solve some of these inequalities.
Anybody want to jump in? I actually have an interesting. I think I agree with Alton. I think this lens of positivity, where we are truly seeing this sort of shift towards a momentous. It feels like there is some sort of momentum behind this like social upheaval. You know what I mean? That there is some sort of like powerful backing of a wave that is causing these like frontline changes, or like these symbolic changes. But I kind of want to ask, like, especially with the statues, that I think was always a conundrum for me, because statues are these very symbolic kind of like figures or a physical object that we can attribute, as like the sort, I guess in my mind, I think of it as like a scapegoat, right? And it's like, when we're bringing this down, we're tearing down the system with it, right? But like, do we feel like symbolic changes like and some changes in practice, like the increase of representation in TV commercials, as I keep going back to this example, like, do we feel like these symbolic changes, do they represent something larger in practice, or do we feel like the buck kind of stops there? As at least in my opinion, it has the past 6 years, to Aten's point, like the past 6 years of like these movements, it seems like it's one symbolic gesture after another without any real potential for institutional change, or else we wouldn't have to be in this situation yet another time. I'm curious to hear everybody's thoughts on that. Sorry, that was a kind of convoluted question. I'll try and type it in the chat as well. But anybody can jump.
I don't necessarily think that it's not going anywhere. I think this particular avenue of like breaking statues, of like tearing them down, I think it's a specific outlet of like the public's feelings behind the whole situation. But I think that, like was previously mentioned, this next generation of lawyers is being educated now to fight what like previous institutions and what has been laid down before. So I think that while like specifically the avenue of tearing down statues and essentially vandalism, but also to erase these racist people's pasts, I think it's like an important gesture, but I don't think that's the only way things are changing.
Yeah, to go off of what Albert was just saying, I think it's creating avenues and like doors of opportunity for further change to happen. Wiping away the past by breaking down the statues is one thing, but we need to also replace that past and that like memory with something more progressive. And because what he was just saying, like, yeah, it's at the end of the day, it is vandalism, but it's all about how you frame it, right? So it's like, what are you replacing that statue with? What are you leaving behind?
Yeah, I think even we can like look at Germany as a corollary, right? It's not like they don't have any statues of Nazi leaders, but they also have like an intensive curriculum about the Holocaust and how it happened and like all the precursors to got them where they were, right? So they don't celebrate it in any means, like they wouldn't have Confederate general statues, but they also teach school children that like how fascism occurs and all that. I mean, even now, like there is a far right party that is growing a momentum in Germany now, right? But still, they've done that in a way like for the last 70 years at least, where people don't support those kind of views, but they're very cognizant of like that view and that people, their own legacy led them to an atrocious place. So, I mean, they're not like, I don't think they're necessarily like every day going about repenting about that, but they are like, if we don't acknowledge this past, understand how we got here, we're doomed to repeat it. So I think that's a good model. Is it going to end all racism in Germany? No, or in US, but I think it's a model we can aspire to.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point. And I think we often don't explicitly condemn things when it comes to racist actions a lot of the time, especially coming out of like 4 years of a Trump presidency where he was making it okay to not explicitly condemn those kinds of things and say that they're not okay. I think that the value in kind of getting rid of statues is that it's kind of a message of saying that these aren't the values that we want to uphold as like a city or a country. And I think that it's energy like better spent on like putting statues up for civil rights activists or human rights activists rather than having people who should be condemned for their actions seemingly celebrated. So I think there is some value in like getting rid of them, especially because like there's not really any reason to keep them, in my opinion. So like just keeping them for keep's sake doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I think it could be like capitalized on for something good. But as many people have said, it's not the silver solution to anything, just a step.
Yeah, I actually think something that Sanjay or that Atin and Ashley both touched on together is kind of this idea of like, obviously it's kind of self-awareness, but in a grander context, like almost cultural competence and like, you know, just being aware and not culturally tone deaf in a way. So I've been reading a bunch of articles about like Black historians who have kind of been like, there aren't a bunch of other nations where there are basically statues and rectifications of like people that have done legitimate atrocities to people around the world. In, you know, in the way that America thinks that they're like a very developed place, we're also like very, you know, antiquated and left back in the past in other ways. And so that kind of is something that I think brings on the idea of like, oh, what are we really valuing? Is the idea of like the statues and the stuff like, yeah, that's really important, but it's like it's beyond just the idea of that. It's like, you know, really rectifying all of the negative impact that's happened over a time that's like caused generational trauma, right?
I like that idea of cultural competencies and this idea of developing cultural competency as a skill and as a practice and learning from media and learning from people in your community. And I'm kind of curious to kind of shrink it back down to our individual levels. Like in your communities, do you feel like there has been a shift towards cultural competencies? Do you feel like people have taken a greater effort in the spaces that you inhabit and the places that and the people that you interact with? Do you feel like there has been a general shift towards this level of cultural competency, trying to move beyond anything symbolic and actually develop this sort of like understanding? I don't know, some of you are like teachers or like, you know, in your workplaces or even with, like with your families. I'm very, very interested to hear everybody's perspective on that.
One thing I just want to say is, even if I feel like probably a lot of us are thinking like, you know, we're talking about race here. Culture could be anything, right? You could be from the South, you could be from a rural area, and your culture could be Trump America. Like, are we competent in understanding those people's cultures? I think not. I think we're probably worse off, even if we're like hyperbolic in the way we talk about race. It may not work the same way if you're a white poor person who lives in Arkansas and is about Trump. Many of us may not listen to you. So I don't feel like we're becoming more culturally competent. I think we're being selectively culturally competent in what makes us feel like we know what we're talking about. We're on the right side of history, blah, blah, blah.
I think that's really accurate. I just spent a long time talking about what's happening in law school, but I grew up in Oklahoma and Louisiana, and the things I see on my Facebook suggest that what Atin said is absolutely correct. So complicated bag here.
I definitely can agree with that. I mean, I'm currently in like deep woods, Western New York, which might as well be Alabama. And just like driving down the street, especially during election time and stuff, like massive like churches that have like giant Trump flags like painted on the sides of buildings and everything. And you know, you hear people like the chatter that you overhear is like, you know, people were upset during the election and the whole general air about like this whole area was very you know, angry and just like it but at the end of the day, right, it's like those are the people that that are like living right next door, like these people who are like genuinely, you know, nice enough people who will be nice enough to like lend a neighbor a cup of sugar or something like that, right? But like we don't necessarily account for the other extreme, to Athens and Vinci's point. And I feel like that is actually kind of why we try and like create these spaces, is so that people can really flex those reflection muscles in that case and be like, all right, do I feel like I'm getting even more like absurdly upset with like or practicing like unhealthy like engagement with like just deleting, you know, all right, far right wing or like anything that I think is extreme, you know, and boxing myself even further into what I think is this like self-righteous narrative or like self-righteous like path for myself. Or am I really working to understand like all those around me and all the people that I interact with? And one kind of interesting point that I think is taking shape is like this band of the current state of like teaching right now in terms of like the new cohort of teachers are like all these like very liberal, you know, obviously college educated to be able to like be a teacher, but like these people who come in with their preconceived notions. And like I'm not saying, you know, I necessarily disagree with any of these people, but like when they say that like school should be objective, or like when people especially I remember like when Ben Shapiro or whoever it was like came to speak at USC, a lot of people's argument was like that should be allowed, that should be okay, right? Like just because it's on one extreme versus the other extreme, like what makes it any less valid? And I think that is happening a lot in our schools, like in school in general, and like the way that conversations are steered with like students tends to be in this like what we think is like the progressive like correct direction when we're really trying to be objective, especially in like a content course when we're trying to like teach history. You know, being careful to like not include our obviously our bias or like our perspective like on things that should be objective. And that was just a little bit of like a reflection on like on my situation with like with my kids. But I also think that happens in communities. Like people get this like holier than thou syndrome where they're just like, I'm getting all educated. I see Jane was like, yo, I know exactly what you're talking about. Don't even play like all these people that are just like, I'm getting all educated and I'm gonna like start correcting people because I'm on this next level wave. But like I question the validity of those people. And Jane, actually I would kindly ask you to like speak on that, please, just because I saw you react.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from the Oak Park River Forest area where a couple of us are from, which is like this liberal bubble. And we like pride ourselves on being liberal and progressive. And like that's how I felt in college too, since I was on a pretty liberal campus. But then like, and so sure, these conversations are happening now, which is great. And I like to think people are thinking kind of the same way that I am. But then, for example, some people in our town painted this beautiful Black Lives Matter mural, and then like 2 days later someone defaced it. So it's like, sure, we think we're this progressive woke town, but like surely people have different opinions. So
I definitely see that. And I definitely see that on college campuses, especially like where people really like to think they are one way, or they believe certain things, or they act one way, when they truly have like another more deep-seated opinion that could completely like be at odds with what they're currently learning about or thinking, or how their mind is shaping. I want to kind of transition to our like more closing segment, because obviously an hour is sometimes too long, sometimes never long enough, you know. But we try and stick to an hour. I appreciate everybody who has been sharing. I think a lot of really great things have been said. I hope it's caused you, even if you did not share out, I hope you had the chance to like do a little bit of reflection, and just like see where you're at with all of this in these kind of like crazy times. And I want to focus it, you know, this isn't a politics like podcast or anything, but I do have to bring up politics. The Biden Harris election and inauguration, as we elect the first BIPOC female vice president. Amazing progressive moment for America. But you know, to me, and this may be like an unpopular opinion, like to me it kind of feels like the Obama case, where it's just like, all right, we got a black president, everything's good now, we're gonna rap about it maybe in a couple songs, and everybody's gonna look to us as like a beacon of hope for like progressivism and in America. And like they're trying to usher that in as like a new age. But I'm kind of curious to hear on like the public stage, what do we feel like this, especially my foreign policy friends, what do we feel like this means for like America on the whole? Like, does this signify something deeper? Is this going to trickle down? How is this going to play out as in our image to, you know, to the rest of the world? Or like whatever you think on this particular issue. not issues, but development.
I think for me, kind of these past couple weeks, like I've definitely felt similar feelings to you, Marcus. But I feel like what's been different is that there's definitely people in the Biden administration who I like really can get behind. And like on the foreign policy side, it's like you have like some really good people coming back, like Samantha Power, John Kerry. You have a like good cabinet. So I feel like I've felt like some anxieties over the past 4 years that like I guess kind of I forgot about, got used to, just kind of like slowly start to get away, stop worrying about Twitter as much. And I feel happy that there's like a couple people in the administration that I feel very happy about.
Anybody else? Yeah, I know you got some thoughts up there.
Yeah, I mean, it is just like such a huge relief on so many fronts to obviously have not elected like a racist to like sycophant. But I think there's also like I think it just needs to be like cautious optimism. Like Ashley said, there's so many people that got appointed that are wonderful, experienced, and I think what's really awesome about this administration is that they are like really truly trying to restore all of these institutional things that have just been broken down with so much expertise. But I think that also kind of creates this it can create kind of the same problems that we've seen in prior Democratic administrations, where it's like you get so many people that are so institutionally wrapped up from previous administrations, from their experiences, that again, it's like they are in their own echo chamber of sorts, making decisions that are like somewhat divorced from perhaps the realities of everyday people. Although I think, the past 4 years have like maybe been somewhat of like a turning point on that, so that there might be pressures to like pay attention to all of these people that clearly don't agree with, a progressive vision, and like kind of sewing all of those things together. I now work for the government, so I can like definitively tell that like there is an air of just like everyone just taking a deep breath and like letting it out, because things will function again. And that's really good, because there are so many international problems that just need like a, not necessarily like, I'm not going to like argue for American exceptionalism, but like there needs to be structures that are supporting people to like solve, COVID crisis on an international level and things like that, that just like we have taken a backseat on for the past 4 years, and have really hurt like human rights, development, all of these things that are like, I think, positive achievements of like the international community working together. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that there's still a lot of credibility loss that's going to be hard to make up, because we've kind of revealed like the ugliest sides of ourselves for the past 4 years. So.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I think that idea of cautious optimism is like something that like really resonated with me for sure, just because like I think one of the things, like kind of going back to what Marcus said and what a lot of people have been talking about with like tokenism and getting people that maybe you may or may not want to see for like a very specific reason, but it not necessarily having the exact zeitgeist for it to be able to transition to the type of change that you'd be wanting. And so specifically as it pertains to like Kamala Harris, right? Like it's one of those situations where you're excited at the fact that like, again, first BIPOC female vice president like ever, and that's amazing. But it's important to like look beyond like the, kind of the superficial basis of that. And even though kind of the idea of like representation is being satisfied, it's important to like go beyond that and like focus on policy that actually is going to impact like, you know, some type of like communal peace, you know, communal peace, whether that be like within racial communities, socioeconomic communities, all the communities, right? Like that is the biggest takeaway of the past 4 years, is that clearly everybody is massively stratified and there's got to be some type of like unified effort. Sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, bro, you good. I kind of want to jump. That's a good jumping point to our kind of closing activity segment. Just this idea of Sherrod brings up, I think, an interesting point of like, okay, if we're making these realizations, stratification, et cetera, like, are we also seeing like the action in turn to be able to like say that we're making a positive impact, or that we're making a difference, right? So like, I want us to ask ourselves that question. And I'm really curious, especially given that quarantine has continued and we are stuck in our houses and feel very trapped. Like in many ways, we can't like physically go places or like do things or have events or whatever. But like, I'm curious to do a little brainstorm. How have you, or like how could you work or contribute time, or however you could get involved like during COVID, given all of these circumstances? In what ways do you feel like you could take steps to promote equity and justice, like in these new times that we're saying we've got cautious optimism, era of progressivism potentially rolling in? What about you and your community, and how you can promote equity and justice given things still being remote and COVID and quarantine and whatever? And you know, there's plenty of excuses, I'm sure, with like just jobs and whatever. But what could we be doing? Y'all can pop them in the chat if you don't want to unmute your mic, or if you do want to unmute your mic. That would be wonderful as well to hear even more of your voices before we wrap it up here. Or just blast them in the chat.
I can jump in. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, like Albert said in the chat, supporting Black-owned businesses is something that's like super important. And I mean, I think one of my friends is like has her own business and has been doing a lot of like amazing things, and I really try to like support her business by putting it on my story as much as I can, like letting people know about it. Just like if you know people that have their own business, not just Black people, but anybody that has their own business, like support those businesses right now because it's super important for them.
I was going to say I work in financial affairs at my school, and I think, you know, we try to offer scholarship opportunities and other ways for our students to save money, because you never really know who's coming from what kind of background and what kind of challenges that they face. So really, we try to level the playing field for everybody that's there. And I think providing opportunities like that, if you're a school, if you're a company, if you're an employer, those kinds of things can also go a long way.
I think particularly at my school, I'm on the school newspaper, and we actually have like this unique position where we have a ton of like equity and kind of goodwill built up with administration. So over the summer, they've come out with like all the statements and kind of the symbolism that I guess Marcus was alluding to about like, you know, creating a more diverse community. And I think especially as like a newspaper, we've been able to, like through editorials and through like actually the ability to like invite the headmaster over to the publication suite and just like talk to him, just like make sure that like stuff is on the radar, which I guess is kind of underrated in terms of just like obviously like things can fall by the wayside, especially when you're worried about a pandemic outbreak at your school. Fun times. But just like kind of holding people responsible, especially with like the position of power that we have on campus, has been something that I think we've been really good at.
That's class for Sid. I respect that. High school activism right there. That's more than most kids will ever do. You know what I'm saying? Anybody else? Real quick, we're about to wrap it on up. Any closing thoughts on that note? Obviously, read Black literature, view Black content. but also all independent content, like support artists who are trying to do mission-oriented things, right? Like figure out, you know, online fundraisers, especially now, like, you know, I'm thankfully in a position where I'm not paying rent. And like, I'm sure some of that money, of a very small portion of it, could very easily go to charity or like a cause, or spent on a slightly more expensive item that was made ethically or sustainably. You know what I mean? Intersectional environmentalism. Mari, you want to put a plug?
I was just gonna say this book. I mean, it's more like an anthology. I think. I'll go grab it 1 second.
Gotcha.
It's kind of nice because it's like a collection of shorter essays and other like poems and stuff. But it's called All We Can Save. It's trying to be optimistic about the climate crisis and kind of talking about concrete ways we can work towards progress, as opposed to just kind of focusing on all of the really tragic things that already have to do with the climate. And it was edited by a lady her name is Ayanna Johnson. She's really cool. She has a podcast too, called How to Save the Planet, if you're super into environmentalism. I'm kind of a nerd, but so I heard it from her. Has a bunch of different BIPOC authors, and I really enjoyed it because you can read just like an essay every night before you go to sleep.
Weird. Send the link. Drop a link in the Discord. If we all, oh yeah, that's a good segue to socials promotion. All right. That was a great recommendation, Mari. Thank you. If anybody else has any recommendations, drop them in the chat real quick as people are like, you know, dipping out. Thank you all to everybody who shared, everybody who participated, everybody who came, showed out and spoke their piece. I really appreciate all of you, and all of the support that we've gotten has been very wonderful. And we hope that y'all will tell your friends, keep coming back, because the more perspectives, the more diversity, the more people we have coming through, the better these conversations are going to get. We can find ways around, you know, we'll grow in numbers, but we'll find ways around making it small group environments and maintaining, you know, this level of, you know, understanding. And that's pretty much all I got to say about it. Sharad, any,
no, I just want to say thank you everybody for showing up, for showing support. Appreciate that. And also everybody that did a video for us on social media.
Yes, shout out to all
appreciate that. That's a big ups. Love to see the Honesty Hour community participating as well. Love it.
Weird. All right, shameless plug for our social media. We're trying to grow our Instagram, honestyhour.letstalk. And we'll be passing information through there. We'll get everybody on the email list if you're not already. But that concludes our 10th edition of Honesty Hour. Let's talk about it. Yeah, Connor, snaps, claps to all y'all, claps to everybody.